from the north half of the Earth, from Hamburg more precisely, where I'm attending a tunnelers meeting right now. I was actually a little worried in the beginning when I heard about the time overrun and the time that I was going to be left with, but then I thought that this is actually what happens to contractors all the time. There's a problem at the beginning of the job, and the end date always remains the same. So it's nothing really particular, and we'll do that. I hope you can understand what I was saying loud and clear. The important information will be repeated constantly on every page of this presentation. It's actually my website at the bottom. So, the cooperation between FIDIC and the ITA dates back to the founding of ITA in the 1980s. Of course, FIDIC is a lot older than that, but the International Tunneling and Underground Space Association dates back to the 1980s. And it became more and more concrete from the year 2000 onwards. And Working Group 3, which deals with contract practices in the ITA, started to elaborate the guidelines on contracting in underground works, which was published in 2012. And from then on, things went fairly clear, and FIDIC constituted a joint task group in 2014 with the main scope of drafting new conditions of contract for tunneling in underground works. And the Memorandum of Understanding was signed in 2015. So what I'm going to present to you now is roughly a state of the works of what has been done so far in 7 fairly short chapters. I've tried to be short and to the point in order to get back into time. First of all, of course, we had to agree on a definition, and we agreed to define underground works as all works located beneath the natural or man-made surface of the Earth, including ancillary surface works. This means, for example, that the cotton cover tunnel will be underground works, a subsea tunnel, as long as it's underneath the bottom of the sea, will be underground works, whereas a floating tunnel will not be underground works. The contract form should cover tunneling and underground works, which means it should cover as well the works at the end as the activity of tunneling. And we then discussed the differences between underground works and other kind of works. And we must admit today's tunnelers, or tunnelers at all times actually, were and still are like the Antarctic explorers 100 years ago. When the South Pole was discovered in 1911, Amundsen set his foot on a place that nobody had ever been before, and that's what happens to tunnelers all the time. They go to places no one has ever been. Also, they've taken considerable risks and often show great courage, and sadly sometimes fail. If I may make an example, we take the Gotthard Rail Tunnel, not the new one, the very long one, but the original Gotthard Rail Tunnel that was built between 1871 and 1881, which means 130 years ago or so. This was a contract that held on 7 pages. It was a lump sum contract agreed on betting on equipment that did not exist at the time or that had not yet reached Switzerland. Like, for example, dynamite that was invented in 1867, or the compressed air-driven drill rigs that weren't available when work started, actually. It required to found a bank to finance the works, And in the end, the contractor who did the works went bankrupt. He also died during the job, as a matter of fact. The promoter lost all his offices and fell into disgrace, but the tunnel was commissioned and has served for 135 years until the commissioning of the new gold base tunnel. So there is actually a very clear difference between underground works and other kinds of works, because we first need to create space within the ground at a place that we don't know before we can get there, and where we very often don't have the means to explore sufficiently in order to exclude major risks. Still, from the motivation paper of Task Group 10 from 2015, at the beginning of our work, we highly depend on geological, hydrogeological, geotechnical ground mass characteristics, and in addition to the difficulty in predicting ground behavior and foreseeable condition, implies an inherent certainty in underground construction, which gives rise to unique risks regarding construction practicability, time, and cost. And I would now like to do a very simplistic example. The example I'm going to give is divided, split into two parts. The first part would be construction, which is a typical silver book contract. And of course, it's also a deep tunnel, which means it is about impossible to get sufficient information about the subsurface conditions. Probe drills are too expensive and would only give very partial information. It is also simplified in the sense that there are no interfaces with other portions of works or with other contractors, just the excavation. It is actually a tunneler's dream. So the example is, in its tender phase, a water diversion tunnel of 1,000 meters length. Half of it is foreseen in very good rock and half of it is foreseen in very poor rock, which means that in half the tunnel, the contractor expects to produce 10 meters of tunnel per day and to incur a cost of €1,000 per day, which means also we have a time estimate for the section A of the tunnel of 50 days. And we have in the section B a very difficult type of rock where production is estimated in 1 meter per day and cost is estimated in €10,000 per meter, which means we have a time estimate for section B of 500 days of work. And we have a price tag for time-related cost, the cost the contractor incurs for immobilization of equipment, for supervision and so on, of €100,000 per month. Now this takes us to a bid through the estimated time for completion of 18 1/3 months, which would be the fixed time the contractor offers in this tender. And we would have a price for production-related costs estimated in 5.5 million, which is 500 meters times €1,000 and 500 meters times €10,000. And we would have a price for time-related cost of 1.833 million, adding up to 7.333 million euro, which would be the fixed price, the lump sum price in our silver book contract. If we take a look at a program as per the bid, we would have a first section A, which is half of the tunnel. You can see this on the left-hand side, 500 meters of tunnel, 10 meters per day. And then section B, poor rock, 500 meters of tunnel, 1 meter per day, adding up to the time through this timeline program. Now, things may go exactly as they're planned, or they might go slightly different. I have two options here. One possibility is the ground is better than was planned, and the production rates of the contractor are as anticipated, which means we have 600 meters of good rock and 400 meters of poor rock, which is not a very big difference as a matter of fact. But we do have actually the contractor who arrives early because the rock is better and the tunnel costs less. If we take a look at the cost the contractor incurred, we have a time of only 15 months, 15.33 months, and we have a total cost of 6.133 million euro. I will spare you the arithmetics, but the tunnel costs less and it takes less to build, and demobilization is 3 months early, just because the rock is better than what was planned. Not because the contractor performed any better. The contractor performed exactly as per his tender and as per the contract. So, although the ground is better than anticipated, the employer does not share the gain. If he wants an early commissioning, he will have to negotiate this, because in the Silver Book contract, as in all FIDIC contract, as a matter of fact, there is no provision for time adjustment, if there is only a provision for time extension by variation, or in the case of unforeseeable physical conditions. So in the Silver Book contract, all of this is the contractor's business anyway. Now, there may be another scenario. There may be the scenario which is 400 meters of good rock and 600 meters of poor rock. Contractor performs as he intended to perform, which means 1 meter per day in good rock and 1 meter per day in poor rock and 10 meters per day in fair rock. And he will, of course, run late, and he will incur a higher cost, and the contractor will lose, although he is performing according to the tender. The real time for completion will, of course, be 3 months longer instead of 3 months less. The real cost will be 1.2 million higher, and there will be delayed damages to be liquidated for 3 months of delay. Of course, this calls for speculations or claims the contractor loses, although he is performing. And we have another example yet. We have worse ground than anticipated, 400 meters of fair ground, 600 meters of poor ground, and the contractor performs better and a lot better than what he had anticipated. He does 12 meters per day, which means 20% more than he had expected in fair ground, and he does 1.2 meters per day, which means 20% more than he had anticipated in poor ground, which is a whole lot. And even though he performs better, as we can see, the contractor will lose, because he will have 17.78 months time for completion, but he will have spent 8.2 million euro instead of the 7.3 million euro that he had anticipated, and which means that he will lose near to €1 million in this case. Which means that even in cases when the contractor is far better than estimated, he may lose just because the ground is worse. This is the first part of my example, and this is also one of the reasons why the ITA Working Group 3, at least, but also Task Group 10, and also the FIDIC world as a whole does not really endorse Silver Book contracts for underground works. We feel that of course, the contractor will have to cover his risks. And he can do this in different ways. Either he adds a supplement to his price, or he will try and claim in case of different ground conditions. In any case, there will be additional cost. We are in this case, of course, on the right-hand side of this graph, where all the risk is put onto the contractor. On the other hand, if the employer takes all his risks, all the risks, the contractor does not really have an incentive to perform, and project costs will run higher than with a correct, fair, and balanced risk allocation.
Matthias, I'm not sure if you can hear me. We seem to have lost contact with you, or you have switched your microphone off. If you could just check that for me, please.
Yes. I lost you at some stage. I lost you completely.
Okay, great. Thanks. We've got you back.
Okay. I don't know how far you heard. Normally, not all the risks that are possible will materialize in a project. And this means that if we allocate them all to the party best prepared to control them, this should lead to lower project costs. Which means that, as a principle, we feel that the groundwater risks should be assigned to the employer, as the party will most benefit from the completed project, and as the party who can best control these risks. Which means that the employer has to do some homework and assess the ground-related risks. Which means that if the ground is worse than anticipated, the employer should pay, but also the employer should profit if the ground is better than anticipated. This is correct. And he should be entitled to profit in terms of cost as well as in terms of time, because if he takes the risks if the ground is worse. On the other hand, in a given ground, the performance-related risks arising from expected ground conditions should be assigned to the contractor. Which that the contractor should be entitled to more profit, or to profit as opposed to what he had expected, if he is faster than he had offered in a given ground. And the profit resulting from better performance should be his. Whereas if he is slower than he offered in a given ground, of course he should bear the pain. So we would allocate each risk to the party who is best prepared to control it. Now, what does this mean in our example? We still have the same tunnel. What you can see on the slide is in red the parts that are in the sphere of risk of the employers, and in green the parts of risk that are in the sphere of risk of the contractor. We still have the same. The base example is exactly the same. We still have 18.33 months of time for completion, and we have 7.33 million euro as an accepted contract amount in Finnish language. Now, what happens is this is still the same. What we might call the accepted contract program, or as we have come to call it, baseline schedule represented in a graphic way as a timeline program. Now, in our first scenario, the ground is better than anticipated. The production rates are as anticipated. Time for completion should be adjusted. It should be shortened. Geology is better, the production is anticipated, which means the contractor has performed as he was supposed to, whereas the ground was better, which means that the gain should actually go to the employer, whereas the contractor should have neither pain nor gain. In times of money, this means that there should be an early commissioning by 3 months, and the adjusted contract price low. Of course, he takes equipment away 3 months early as opposed to what he had planned for, and he will have neither pain nor gain because he will be paid exactly for what he has done. Contractors paid for time and for production rates as per the encounter geology, what he had offered. In the second case, we have, again, the situation where we have 400 meters of section A of tunnel and 600 meters of section B of tunnel, which means that the poor geology has become longer and the fair geology has become shorter, which means that there will be a time adjustment in terms of an extension of time for the contractor. The pain will be borne by the employer because the geology is worse, and the contractor will have neither pain nor gain. He will be paid according to what he had to do, which means that he will be paid for his extension of time. He will get 3 months more of time-related cost payment, and he will also get more money for what he had to do in terms of cross-section and of cost per cross-section, which means he will be paid 8.5 million for what he has done, and he will have 21.33 months of time to commission the tunnel, irrespective of when he actually finishes. And we come to this now in the third portion of the example. If geology is worse than anticipated, but production rates are better than anticipated, this means that he will have, the contractor will be entitled to a time adjustment because geology is worse, but he finishes early. And this is where we can earn money, as we see later. We have actually, we finished the tunnel in 16.7 months, as you can see on the top right. Now 17.78 months. Yes, that's this one. And we are entitled to 21.33 months, which means that the equivalent gain due to the price paid for time-related cost, additional price paid for time-related cost is 355,000 euro, which is something the contractor gains because he has performed better. And of course, he is paid by linear meter price for all the meters of tunnel he has done in one and the other geology, which means that we have a worse ground where the employer will have to pay more, and we have better production rates in the actual ground conditions, which means it gives an additional gain to the contractor. This again corresponds to the attribution of risk. Ground risk goes on the employer, production risk goes to the contractor. Now, what does this mean? In terms of concept, we have tried to translate this idea into a slightly more detailed concept. And of course, the world is a lot more complicated than simplified examples. It just takes simplified examples to start to understand what we're talking about, and then we'll have to write things in a way that they function also for more complicated work. Concepts are that, one, ground and groundwater related risk should be assigned to the employer, and performance risk should be assigned to the contractor. Two, and this is very important, and this is something we still don't see everywhere. Actually, we see it in few places. We should disclose, the employer should disclose all available geological and geotechnical information and hydrogeological information, of course. When he goes to tender, all information should be transmitted to pre-qualified tenders if there's a pre-qualification system, avoiding the use of disclaimers, caveats, and exculpatory language, which is something we see very often, that this is all-inclusive and so on. We should include a contractual geotechnical baseline. This is something which is used in certain parts of the world, not everywhere. The geotechnical contractual baseline should be included that sets out the contractual limits of conditions anticipated to be encountered, and so provides a clear distinction in the contract documents between expected and unexpected underground conditions and behavior. And for all the conditions that are outside the expected ground conditions, there should be inclusion clause, as we have it in FIDIC in most of the contract. Now, the unforeseeable physical conditions clause, as far as subsurface conditions are concerned, should be defined only on the grounds of the contractual geotechnical baseline and should not refer to something that an experienced contractor might have foreseen or things like this. This means this last thing, we have tried to represent this in a graph. If we have this large black egg, which would be all possible physical conditions, and we would have the foreseeable physical conditions, which is the green egg B, the ground conditions for the underground parts of works, which is brown egg C, the intersection between the egg C and the egg B would be covered by the geotechnical baseline report, which means that everything that's in the geotechnical baseline report is as well foreseeable as part of the ground conditions for underground parts of works, which means that for underground excavation purposes, the unforeseeable would go under subclause 4.12 in the current FIDIC Yellow Book, changed in the new FIDIC Yellow Book, and for all other purposes, unforeseeable would be only the rest of everything outside the yellow, everything outside the yellow, the green egg and the brown egg would relate to other unforeseeable physical conditions, but not the ones related to underground works. This means that the geotechnical baseline report should actually be limited in its importance to the ground conditions, subsurface conditions for the underground portions of work. To conclude with the concepts, we should have a ground classification system that properly reflects the effort of excavation and stabilization of the space that is required to create in order to construct the works underground. What we say that the contractor should be measured according to his tender, which is production related. His price is related on the estimate of the production he can achieve in a certain type of ground, as well in terms of time as in terms of money. We should have a ground classification system that takes this into account, and we should tender accordingly. Contractual classification of ground conditions should be based on the measures the contractor has to take in order to excavate and support the ground, so as to minimize claims and disputes. This means that we would need to have something that we have called, meanwhile, a baseline schedule, which will include a translation into a schedule of the conditions expected in the geotechnical baseline report. Then, time for completion is largely influenced by ground conditions. If the contractor performs as expected, it will actually be only conditioned by ground conditions, by subsurface conditions. This means that we need to have a time adjustment mechanism, which will allow for adjustment in terms of extension of time, of course, if ground gets worse, but it should also allow for a reduction of time for completion in case the ground gets better, which means that if the ground gets better, there should be a gain to the employer. Then we should have a provision, a flexible mechanism for the remuneration according to ground conditions, foreseen and unforeseen, which means that we would foster a unit price contract, a payment system for items that are affected by ground and groundwater conditions. Unit price structure should recognize the distinction between fixed costs, time-related costs, value-related costs, and quantity-related costs, which means fixed cost is anything that is independent from the ground and has a fixed cost, such as taking the equipment to the site, building the camp, the installation, and so on. Time-related cost will typically be the immobilization of equipment. A TPM is a huge investment. It's counted in tens of millions of euro or dollars. This means that the immobilization of the TPM has a cost. And this cost is time-related. The longer the job takes, the more it costs. Same thing, of course, applies to the supervision and site management and things like this. Value-related costs would be typically insurance costs, and quantity-related costs, of course, are hello?
Sorry, we lost you for a few seconds,
Are
but
you
you're
there
back
again?
on. Yes?
Yes, let me see if we can get back to the presentation. It actually was there. Yes. Can you see it again?
Yes, it's up. Thanks.
Is it there? Okay. And quantity-related costs are, of course, related to how much excavation in difficult ground there will be, how many rock bolts, how many rig beams, how much shotcrete, and so on. Just taking a very easy differentiation. These are the concepts. Now, this has to be translated into contract language, and we had decided. And this is something else that needs to be said. We had to decide on how this contract form for underground works, for tunneling and underground works, should be constructed. Actually, the Emerald Book is only working title because it takes the color from the color of the International Tunneling Association's logo. But it will be a decision by FIDIC what the name of the final document will be. Anyway, we decided that it should be a standalone document, a contract formed on particular conditions, because a standalone document will be more easily recognized, and there's less of a risk of tampering with it than with particular conditions that can be plugged on. If it is a standard document, a standalone document, thought it would be a good thing to do something that would differ as little as possible from something that people know to be a FIDIC document and recognize as a FIDIC document, which means, as we said, we don't endorse the undergrounds, and we are left then with the red book or the yellow book, talking about the unit price mechanism and so on. The most obvious choice is actually the red book, but we know that the yellow book gives more of a possibility to include the contractor's knowledge and the contractor's inventive to get better projects actually than what the employer may have invented in the first place. And so we decided to take the yellow book as the model and to base our contract on the yellow book. While only tweaking the yellow book in places where it was absolutely necessary, the tunneling form should remain a FIDIC form to all effects, except for the places where things are really different from what the standard physics books would be. So we have some amendments to the definitions, like the geotechnical baseline report or like baseline schedule, that are not included in an ordinary Yellow Book contract. We have some provisions for the use of the geotechnical baseline report. That's very important because this is a limitation of contractor's risk. Contractor shall be entitled to rely on the contents of the geotechnical baseline report, including the anticipated subsurface conditions as set out in the baseline schedule, irrespective of any discrepancies or contradictions that may exist between such conditions and the conditions described in site data or other documents made available by the employer. Then we have something in subclause 17.2. Now this will change because it has to a very great extent, and it's not called, it hasn't got anything to do with the risk, as a matter of fact, anymore with risks as we understand it here. It also bears another title in the new Yellow Book, and this is a very, very recent development actually in the Yellow Book, in the new Yellow Book. So we'll have to see how we actually get this clear distinction between the employer's risks and the contractor's risks written down properly. This is something that Task Group 10 is currently doing. Then we have included in the priority of documents the baseline schedule, which is this description of things the contractor has to do, and the completion schedule, which is milestones, basically, according to expected geology, which have a very high priority, and the geotechnical baseline report, which has a high priority too. Higher priority and the general conditions of contract anyway. Then we have a series of subclauses that have been amended or that have been inserted. We have actually the series of the subclauses of the Yellow Book. I'm not going to go through all of them. We have an engineer's role, which is stronger than in a typical. We want the engineer to be the contractor's partner when it comes to deciding on what is necessary and what is not. Partner, and also critical. Well, let's say critical partner, because it will be the engineer who will be the employer's voice to all effects when it comes to defining these things on site. Which means that in a Yellow Book context, the contractor will be responsible for design, for final design anyway. And on the other hand, the employer should pay only what is necessary in terms of support and measures for excavation and so on. And somebody has to be the antagonist of the contractor when it comes to the discussion, was something necessary or not. Now, the choice was between having an employer's representative in addition to the engineer, but as the engineer is the employer's representative to all effects anyway in the application of these contracts, not for the Red Book, but for the Yellow and the other books, we decided that it would be a wise thing to endow the engineer with the power and with the competence and also with tasks to do so. Then we have introduced the notion of key equipment. We have equipment which is absolutely necessary to perform the underground works, and these items of equipment become key equipment. We have a series of contractors' obligation, of course. We have a reference to the DAAV and the obligation payment to the contractor, and a whole set of things that are typically related to underground works. As you can see, we still have here in these definitions 17.1 and 17.2 employers' risks and contractors' risks. This will change, of course, because the Yellow Book has changed. In the end, I did a count in March this year. We found out that we have tweaked about 10% of the sub-clauses of the new Yellow Book. Now, the new Yellow Book in its latest version has been shortened a little bit as opposed to the version we had in March. And this means that it might be maybe 12% of sub-clauses that have been tweaked or inserted, which is a very minor portion, which also means that the underground works contract will still be recognizable to all effects as a FIDIC for the contract. Now, something about the state of works and about the timing. The general conditions of contracts have passed limited internal review, which means a review by FIDIC Contracts Committee, by special advisors of FIDICs, and by a limited circle of people from the ITA. The corrections have been agreed and have been integrated. We had interesting discussions with members of the Contract Committee on this. The tables of contents for guidance for particular conditions and for tender documents are ready. Actually, the guidance for tender documents are almost ready as an entire document. As some of you may remember, in the old Yellow Book, I don't know how this will be in the new one, but in the old Yellow Book, there is no chapter which is called guidance for the preparation of note on preparation of tender documents within the guidance for the preparation of particular conditions. This is something else we changed. We will have a chapter which describes what the employer should do before he goes to tender, because, of course, in underground works as in other works, but in particular in underground works, a good tender will depend largely on the homework done by the employer, and we want to give him some guidance on this. We have given presentations to the FIDIC International Contract Users Conference regularly. We have discussed the particulars with the FIDIC CC, and we have also given regular presentations to the ITA Executive Council and to the ITA Working Group 3. We are in touch in a loose information on the state of works with the European international contractors. We do not let them interfere very much with our works because it's not their contract. It will be a FIDIC contract for all effects, but they will, of course, participate in the friendly review of this work. Now, we will have the draft ready for the guidance for particular conditions of contracts and for tender documents this autumn. I hope we will be ready with that by the International Contract Users Conference in London in December. We will have a draft of the forward by the same time, and we will have drafts of the timelines and of the model forms by winter. And we will be ready with a friendly review draft 3 months after the distribution of the new Yellow Book. We have been working to a moving target as far as the Yellow Book is concerned up to now, and now we have decided that at this stage of drafting, it would be useless to go on to change things and continue changing things without a final version as it will be distributed, as far as we've heard, in London in December. There will be a presentation, I think, in Jakarta, but there will be a written documentation handed out at Contract Users Conference, and from then on, it will take us roughly 3 months to integrate everything and to be ready for friendly review, which is a fairly good timing as far as ITA is concerned, because we will be out with our friendly review draft before the World Economic Congress, which will be held in Dubai in April next year. And the same thing should actually apply to FIDIC. So we will hopefully get the friendly review by spring next year, and then we will see how many remarks we get, how many questions we get, and we're looking forward to those questions, which certainly will lead to a better document. And if things go well, we should be ready for the subsequent stages by autumn next year, legal review, and whatever has to follow. Of course, task group 10 has also been given a last task, which is the draft also of a user's guide, which we will start doing only when legal review is through and when we see more or less what our book will look like in the end. We have a very good news regarding the work we have done from CERN, the European Centre for Nuclear Research, with 20 member states and cooperating states from all over the world. I think South Africa cooperates with CERN as well. Has not only launched it, has launched the tender for the high luminosity project, including underground works for a value of about 150 million euro. It's not a very major underground works, but it is a very visible underground works. And the contract form is a bespoke fitting red book, and it includes the adapted clauses from what Task Group 10 has done so far, and fully applies the principles and concepts that have been indicated by IATA Working Group 3 and by this joint Task Group 10. This gives us a road test before we go out with the document. We will see what contractors think, that we will have very, very, very valuable input from this tender. Now, just one word about the members of this task group. Some names may sound familiar to some of you. We have people from all over the world, I might say, much from Europe, but people with extensive experience in work in Africa, like Jim McClure, who's passed most of his career in sub-Saharan Africa. Jost Eriksson was worked for a long time in India. Hans Ertl from Austria, Andres Barolanda from Colombia. One lawyer, we have an in-house lawyer, which is actually a great luck to us. He's also a partner of Chris Seppola, who is a special advisor for contractual purposes to FIDIC. Myself and Martin Smith, who is currently living in Korea, and to bring some of the Asian experience to us. We also have Zoltan Zahoni, who is the chair of the FIDIC Contracts Committee, as our CC liaison person and as our tutor, which gives us a very direct access to the FIDIC Contracts Committee, which is also very valuable. I think we have good conditions, and I also think we should deliver on time. So I will be ready for your questions, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Matthias, very much indeed. Are there any questions from anybody? I think maybe you, if there are.
Thanks, Ian. Matthias, thank you very much. My name's Alan Woodlake. I work for a specialist underground mining contractor called Marion Robert Cementation. The question goes around the GBR, the baseline report. Is there going to be a set of guidance notes with regards to the... Matthias, can you still hear us?
Excuse me? Yes, can you please repeat what you just said, Alan? I heard you partly and then I lost you.
Okay, so I'll... obviously, there's a lot of dependence on determinations, and that uses the GBR. And I just wanted to understand whether there's going to be a set of guidance notes or included in this entire book that is going to stipulate how it has to be put together and what the standards are and what the contents has to be. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you for the question. We will include a sample form of a table of contents of the geotechnical baseline report, and we'll also include the sample form of a baseline schedule. and we will start developing differentiated sample forms with our users guide, which we will start working on next year. It will be the geotechnical baseline report will have a content that is slightly different from what we all know from geotechnical baseline reports as they're described, for example, by Randy Essex from the US or other very knowledgeable people who have written on geotechnical baseline reports. We need some more information, and in particular in a geotechnical baseline report, we need to have an idea of what the contractor must do in order to excavate and stabilize the cavity that is necessary to perform the works.